Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to be looking at guideline 1B8 in the ICD-10-CM. This is a great example of the role that sequencing will play in applying codes. So it'll be a fairly quick video, but I think it will really help clarify what we mean when we talk about sequencing. So we are in our ICD-10 and we are going to look at the guidelines. And this is going to be guideline Roman numeral 1B8. Not sure if you can see that. I'll write it a bit bigger for you. So we're looking at 1B8. Okay. And so that means we need to go to our guidelines section. And that is this red section here. And when we are talking about section 1, that will be here at the top on page 4, you'll see it says Section 1, Conventions, General Coding Guidelines, and Chapter-Specific Guidelines. So a lot of our videos are going to be related to Section 1. First starts letter A, and then indented underneath that are numbers. We are looking for letter B, which will start on the next page, on page 7. And that is general coding guidelines. And then we are specific, all of this is great information. You should review all of it. But we are specifically looking at number 8 here at the bottom. And this says acute and chronic conditions. So the guideline here states if the same condition is described as both acute and chronic and separate sub-entries exist in the alphabetic index at the same indentation level, code both and sequence the acute code first. Okay, so that might be a bunch of nonsense to you when you first hear it, but as we work through this, I think it will make a lot of sense. So code both and sequence the acute code first. That's what that says. So what does this mean? Basically, this means that for some conditions, there are multiple forms of that condition, and that could be acute, meaning it's something that has just presented itself, or it could be chronic. It could be something that has been ongoing, an ongoing condition, or recurrent, or not necessarily recurrent, but could just be ongoing condition that you have. And they could be have the same type of condition, could be very similar, and you could have both conditions, both an acute version and a chronic version at the same time. So we are going to look at what this actually might look like in practice. And one such condition that has both acute and chronic forms is tonsillitis. So you're probably familiar with tonsillitis. Oh, if that will be easy for you to read or not. Okay. So if you still have your tonsils, you might get tonsillitis, and you could have an acute version, or you could have chronic, or you could have both at the same time. Isn't that a bummer? So we're going to figure out the codes for these conditions, and then we are going to sequence them properly. So let's look up tonsillitis. Remember, when we are looking at our main terms, most of the time, the biggest hint that I can give is figure out what is being described, okay? So yes, if you look up the terms chronic or acute, those might be in the index, but you are going to have a really difficult time finding an entry under acute for tonsillitis, and or another condition, because so many conditions are acute and so many conditions are chronic, all right? So even though these terms might exist in the index, that is not the fastest or easiest way to find them. We want to figure out what is being described. Tonsillitis is being described. That is the condition that the patient has. And the terms acute and chronic are describing the type of tonsillitis. This is so describing terms could be related to the severity or the type. So we could have severe tonsillitis would be the severity, right? Chronic is the type of tonsillitis. So we're going to use tonsillitis as our main term, and that is what we're going to look up in the index, or the alpha, however you call it. So you should have a tab in the alpha, and we will go to the letter T. And there's so many letters in here, or so many words in here. It can be a little bit time consuming. So we are at TO. Okay, so on 459 is where we see tonsillitis. And let's see if I can get this a little bit closer. But here is where tonsillitis is, and you will see that the very first term in parentheses, it says acute, and it gives a whole bunch of um, other terms that can describe the type of tonsillitis. And then it gives a code right here, JO3.0. So JO3.90. And then underneath is a separate term at the same indentation level. So it's not, so it's going to be separate from this one that's acute. It's called chronic. Okay, so there's a specific entry for chronic and another code listed there. And that is, so here's JO3.90, and then we have J35.01. Okay, now you might be tempted to stop here and say, great, I've got two codes. Nope, we need to go check it. So go to your J tab, which should be tabbed here. We're going to look at J03, which is on 943. Here is our J03, and then we need 0.9, and this is acute tonsillitis. And we need JO3.90. So we're looking here, we want to check, make sure all of this is appropriate. There's no other guidance here. JO3.90, acute tonsillitis unspecified. We don't have any other specification of the type of tonsillitis. The other code underneath this JO3.9 is acute recurrent tonsillitis unspecified. We don't have any indication that this is recurrent. So we will not use JO3.91. We will use JO3.90, which is right here at the bottom. You can see it here, acute tonsillitis unspecified. Okay. So that is the code that we're going to use for our acute tonsillitis. Now our chronic tonsillitis is going to be J35.01. So we want to skip up to J35. And looks like that is on 947. J35.0 is right here in the middle of the page. Now you see this red stop sign. That means we can't use it as is. So we want to check the indented codes underneath it, because this red stop sign is telling us we cannot use this code as is. We need additional characters. So J35.01 is chronic tonsillitis. And then it looks like there are some other codes for tonsillitis and adenoiditis. So we don't have any information about adenoiditis, so we're not going to use either of these other indented codes. We're going to use the J35.01, okay? J35.01, okay. So we have two codes. We know this is what we're going to use. We know the patient has both of these conditions at the same time. So we need to figure out how are we going to list these two codes as the answer to our question, or as we are reporting it for reimbursement. So if we go back and we look at our guidelines again, that 1B8 says if the same condition described as both acute and chronic and separate subentries exist in the alphabetic index at the same indentation level, code both and sequence the acute code first. Okay? So we knew when we looked these up in the alpha, hey, these were both indented at the same level, acute and chronic. Okay? So that means these are not one is not a more specific form of the other. These are two separate conditions, um, separate types of tonsillitis. And we do have codes for both of them. And this guidance is going to tell us, so we have both of those. Code both, we would need to use both codes, and we would sequence the acute code first. So when we are reporting this, we would code